Boom, we're live. Welcome everybody to the Wisdom Movement Method Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Wisdom. Today we're going to talk about Top Gun. Do you remember how old you were when you saw Top Gun for the first time? And what does Maverick, Iceman, Rocky Balboa, all these characters, what do they have in common? Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show. So I had some fun with this concept today. I saw Top Gun 2, and I thought it was amazing. I thought it was an incredible remake. But here's what these characters have in common. Rocky, Maverick, Iceman, and even some of the Star Wars characters. These characters, which many people love, all are part of reboots some 35 years later. Think about that for a second. Remember how old you were when you saw Top Gun for the first time. Remember what kind of shape you were in. And think about it. Hollywood asked these characters 35 years later, and some even more, close to 40 years later, to reboot the characters, to get back into shape, and needless to say, make it believable. It's got to be believable that these characters are still what they used to be. And quite honestly, in Hollywood, if you cannot do that, you don't get the role. You don't get the role. I think one of the characters from Top Gun, the female love interest, was not asked back because they didn't feel like she was going to be a good fit. And realistically, it was more of a she wasn't fit and she didn't look like she did before. So Hollywood said no, and they got someone else to replace her. But what's amazing about this concept is if we look at Tom Cruise, we look at Sylvester Stallone, you may from the outside think, man, these guys have always been pretty fit and can't really relate to them. They don't really have challenges. I think that we would be missing the mark because I want to share a couple points. I want to look at what are these guys doing to get in shape, to play these roles. How are they doing it? I mean, Sylvester Stallone is mid-70s and he is still doing action movies. That is incredible. Like, just straight away, that is absolutely incredible. The level of the level of physical ability he has to do an action movie. And so, you may think, man, they're not relatable. Well, two specific injuries I can think of where these guys had to get back after having a serious injury. Sylvester Stallone broke his neck in, I think it was Expendables 2. He was doing scenes. Now he's like, at the time, in his 60s, and he's getting the most massive, big-time male celebrities, the male action heroes, right? And putting them all in one movie. And then Stallone, really probably the oldest of all of the actors, is still doing a lot of his own stunts. He gets tackled by one of the massive dudes on the set, and he breaks 2 or 3 vertebrae in his neck. And they're able to surgically repair it, to my knowledge. He has a fusion in his neck, so they fused multiple vertebrae together. And so literally, he's not able to move his neck. He's not able to move his neck in certain positions. I'm not saying it's fused in a couple vertebrae together, so he's lost range of motion in his neck. But for anybody normally, that's a major setback and could derail anyone. But yet, what does Stallone do? He did rehab. He got back to his training. He got back to his strength training. He got back to doing his nutrition. He got back to his regiment. And honestly, people don't even know that this happened. Like, that's how on it in terms of his training. So when, Hollywood, and really he is the Hollywood mogul moving these movies, when he wants to do a Rocky reboot, some 30 plus, 35 years later, he can make it believable because he's kept a standard of fitness. He's continued to strength train his entire career. Really, probably the least amount of strength training is when he was younger in his 20s, and he's only been more diligent about his training as he's gotten older. But let's look at Tom Cruise. The same. Tom Cruise gets asked to do Top Gun 2. He did Top Gun when he was 25. He's 24, 25 years old. He's just naturally healthy, fit. And now they ask him to do it, and he's almost 60 years old when he does Top Gun 2. Well, he's another guy that's had an injury. He does his own stunts. He severely broke his ankle on a set of Mission Impossible in the last couple of years, and did his rehab, and people don't even know what happened. They literally have no idea that he went through this thing. So my question back to you is, I'm curious if you remember what kind of shape you were in 20, 30 years later, and now you're here. Are you in great shape? And maybe you are. Maybe you maintain like these guys. You maintain your shape. Maybe you've let yourself slip a little bit. Maybe you have stopped training altogether. Well, what are some takeaways that we can learn from these actors that are asked to play these roles? I think a biggie is making training a priority in your life. Making it a day-to-day thing that you're going to do day in and day out. And if you're in the 50 plus population, so are these guys. Look at it. Look at Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise, I think, is 60 now. Look at Stallone. Stallone's like 75 years old. But what they are doing is taking care of their bodies in terms of training, in terms of nutrition, in terms of cardiovascular training. But specifically, it's also a level of being able to adapt to the style of training that you do. And that's one of the things I do in terms of helping clients is working with the 50 plus population, and how we train at 50 probably, and should be, if it's not, different than how you train when you're 25. When you're 25, you're 22, you can go hard. Oftentimes things don't break. Oftentimes you can push yourself, you can sleep less, your nutrition can be worse, can be not great. But if you're lifting and you're doing some training, you tend to see some results. When you get in this 50 plus population, training's got to be more dialed in. But most importantly, I believe the style of training has to match where you are. Like if you're 60 years old, I'm not going to have you do a ton of joint impact exercises. I'm not going to have you do a ton of bounding and jumping and exploding and running and heavy weights, 1 rep max. All of that style of training, which may be fun when we're younger, can be very problematic and potentially can cause injury. And if you're in the 50 plus population and you're getting back to training, well, it's even more important that we're looking at posture. You'll hear me say this time and time again on this podcast and on this YouTube channel. We look at posture. I look at posture. I look at joint range of motion, and I match the correct strength training to where you are, what your goals are, and focusing on, we can train higher intensity. We can push you, but we don't want to do a lot of joint impact. We want to actually decrease joint impact. So if you're 60, 50, 60, 70, we want to do little to no joint impact, but we want to focus on posture, joint range of motion, and strength training that is going to improve posture and hold these gains that we make, hold them in place. And that's the good news with kind of looking at these guys. Looking at them, they're an inspiration. People that are able to do the things they want to do physically, lift their grandkids, go on trips, travel. These are opportunities. I'm going to talk about this in another podcast. These are opportunities to live your life. And the flip side of that is what happens when the opportunity arises and we're not able to do the things we want to do because our body just doesn't allow it. And what can you do about it? What can you do when you're in that 50, 60, 70 plus population? Opportunities arise. Well, if you're focusing on posture, joint range of motion, proper training, proper flexibility, you're going to be able to do more. That's the punchline. So as these actors inspire us and remind us, you remember back to what it was like to be healthy, be fit. Don't let that bum you out. Use that as a catalyst. Use that as a spark. Use that as an ignition point to start to do things. What can you do to get in the shape you want to get and to be able to do the things that you want to do? So, hope this inspired you. I know it did for me. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Good morning and good night.